All right, welcome to the deep dive. So, you know how in physics, you have this concept of inertia.
Right.
So things keep doing what they're doing, whatever that is,
Mm.
until something else comes along to, stop them.
Yeah.
Well, today we're actually going to look at a really similar idea,
Mm.
but instead of just like objects moving around, it's for like existence
Oh,
itself.
okay.
It's called ontological inertia. And that's the basic idea that things, they just keep on existing unless something makes them stop. And we're going to really get into it today. We've got a wild mix of sources here. Like we're talking philosophy across centuries and even some modern science that kind of lines up in surprising ways. So our mission for this deep dive, why do things persist? And what is it exactly that makes them change or even disappear?
Sounds like a pretty big question to tackle.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what we do here. So to kick things off, let's jump into the deep end and go way back, start with some of the like OG thinkers who grappled with this stuff.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
All right, so we got to start with Aristotle, right? I mean, he's kind of a big deal in philosophy.
Yeah.
And one of his most famous ideas is this concept of the unmoved mover. So what's that all about?
Okay, so the unmoved mover, it's basically this eternal, like, necessary being, okay? And for Aristotle, it's the ultimate source of all motion and existence in the entire universe.
So it's like the thing that starts everything, right?
Exactly, like the first domino. And so now you bring up ontological inertia, and one way to look at it, like through this lens of the unmoved mover, is that you have this initial push, And from there, things just keep going. They just continue to exist because they were set in motion. So the focus shifts a little bit, right? It's less about constantly needing a cause for being and more about what might actually disrupt that initial force.
Okay, so I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So it's like Aristotle's giving us this original on switch for the universe, and then this ontological inertia is saying, well, once it's on, it tends to stay on unless something comes along to specifically turn it off.
Exactly. It's a really subtle but pretty profound shift in perspective.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so we've got Aristotle laying some groundwork here, but we've got some other thinkers to consider. What about Spinoza? What does he bring to the table when we're talking about why things just are?
Yeah, so Spinoza is really interesting. He had this idea called substance monism. And basically, it's this idea that the whole universe, everything, is just one single, infinite, and self-sustaining substance. And he called it like God or nature.
Okay, so everything is just one big, like, connected thing.
Right. And the key here is that this substance, it exists necessarily. It doesn't need anything outside of itself to keep it going. Existing, it's not some optional thing. It's like the default state of reality.
So kind of like how we were saying with Aristotle, it's not that something's constantly making things exist. It's more like existence is just the natural state of things.
Exactly. For Spinoza, existence isn't like fragile and in need of constant support. It just is. That's the point he's making. And that really connects back to ontological inertia, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I see that. So for Spinoza, everything just is, and it just keeps on being because that's just how it is.
And that inherent self-sufficiency that just is-ness really gets to the heart of ontological inertia. It's this built-in tendency towards persistence, this just continuing to exist.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get this. But then in our sources, there's Descartes.
Mm.
And his idea about a continuous act of creation, that feels like a different take, right?
It is, yeah. Descartes actually said that God's actions, like right now, in this moment, are what are sustaining everything. Without God actively keeping things going, he thought that everything would just like poof, vanish.
Wow, okay, so every single moment is kind of like a new creation always happening.
Exactly. Now, when you compare this to ontological inertia, it's almost like the opposite, right? Descartes is stressing this need for some outside force, this continuous effort to keep being going, whereas ontological inertia suggests there's this kind of internal momentum.
So like it's already running, it doesn't need that constant push.
Right, yeah. It's like, to use your analogy from before with Descartes, you have to hold that power switch on all the time, but ontological inertia is more like it's flipped on and it just stays on until someone comes along and flips it off.
Okay, I see the difference now. Descartes is all about dependence on this external force, but ontological inertia is about this inherent continuation, this ability for things to just keep on being. Gotcha. All right, so we've talked about Aristotle, Spinoza, and Descartes, right? They've all got some interesting ideas about existence. But what about existentialism? I know we have some sources on those philosophers. What do they have to say about why things stick around?
Yeah, the existentialists, they're coming from a totally different angle, right? They're focused on the experience of being itself, not just like abstract ideas about it. So you have Sartre, who talked about being as this like persistent weight,
Yeah.
something that endures and moves through time.
A weight, like literally heavy.
More like always there, you can't ignore it. And then you have Heidegger, who was really into this idea of temporality. He thought that existence just naturally unfolds, that it has this momentum pushing it forward.
Okay, so it's not just that something exists, it's that it exists through time. And that moving through time gives it this kind of like push forward.
Right. And what's really cool here is that they're moving away from needing a creator or a first cause or anything like that, right? They're focused on the fact that existence just continues on its own, even when things feel uncertain or meaningless.
So even without God or the unmoved mover, stuff just keeps on existing because that's kind of its nature.
Exactly. And that really resonates with ontological inertia.
It's like even with all this like heaviness, all this uncertainty, things still want to just keep on being.
Right. And that's what these existentialist thinkers are exploring. It's that resistance to non-being that's built into existence itself.
Okay, so we've got all these philosophers, all these ideas about how things tend to persist. But that brings up another question, right?
Yeah.
If that's the case, what makes anything stop existing? Like what causes things to end, to cease to be?
Right. That's the million-dollar question when you start with this idea of ontological inertia. If things are naturally going to keep going, then there has to be something that works against that, right? Some force or principle that makes them stop. And your sources bring up a few different answers.
Okay, so let's get into those.
Sure. So, scientifically speaking, you have entropy.
Yeah.
That's this tendency for everything in the universe to move towards disorder. Like things break down, energy dissipates and all that. And you could see that as working against the persistence of things, right?
Yeah, because it's not things staying as they are. It's like
Yeah.
everything's gradually falling apart.
Exactly. So it's like a universal off switch that's slowly working its way through everything. But then if you go to a more theological perspective, like in some religions, the end of something's existence might come from divine will. It's God's choice to end it.
So it's not that things naturally stop existing, it's that God chooses to end them.
Right. And then in existentialism, there's this idea of negation. It's basically the idea that non-being is always a possibility, like a shadow that follows existence around. And for them, that could be the ultimate cause of things ceasing to be.
Wow. Okay, so we've got science, religion, existentialism,
Yeah.
all these different ways of thinking about how things end. This is getting deep.
It is, yeah. And then you get into some even more complex questions, like what about consciousness? What happens to that when we die? Does it have its own ontological inertia, or is it just dependent on our physical brains?
Right, like if existence wants to keep going, does that include our minds, our awareness, or does that just end when our bodies die? That's a huge question. And it makes you think, if ontological inertia is a thing, then what about free will? If things tend to just keep going, does that mean everything is predetermined?
Right, it could lean that way. Like maybe things are just following a set path and they'll just keep going that way unless some outside force changes it. But then again, ontological inertia doesn't say that things can't change from within, right? It just emphasizes that the basic tendency is to continue being. It's like there's this momentum to existence, but it doesn't necessarily lock everything into a fixed trajectory.
So we have all these different ways to think about how things begin and how they end and where consciousness fits in and all that. But there was one concept in our sources that I really want to ask you about because it kind of blew my mind.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It was this idea of metaphysical energy. Like, does existence need some kind of fuel to keep itself going?
Right. It's definitely a more speculative idea, but it gets at this question. Is persistence just the natural state of being, or does it actually require something else to keep it going? Some kind of energy that we might not even be able to detect?
It makes you think about how much we don't know about existence, right?
Right.
Like, are we just scratching the surface? Is there something deeper that we're missing?
Exactly. And the idea of ontological inertia, at least in its most basic form, seems to lean towards the idea that existence just keeps going on its own, that it doesn't need this constant input of energy or anything like that.
Okay, so we've been in the philosophy weeds for a while now. Let's bring this back to the real world. Are there any ideas in modern science that, kind of line up with this whole ontological inertia thing?
Yeah, for sure. Like, obviously, ontological inertia is a philosophical idea, but there are definitely some echoes of it in science. Take physics, for example. One of the most fundamental laws in physics is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that everything in the universe moves towards disorder. Like over time, things tend to break down, become less organized.
Right, so it's like instead of things staying how they are, they're constantly changing and becoming more chaotic.
Exactly. So at first glance, it seems like the opposite of ontological inertia.
Yeah, because things are falling apart, not necessarily persisting.
Right. But then, if you look at a more basic level, you have Newton's first law of motion, which is the principle of inertia. Ah.
Okay, and this law basically says that an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion at the same speed and direction unless something acts on it. So even though the universe as a whole might be moving towards disorder, the individual pieces still have this tendency to stay in their current state, whatever that is.
So, like, even though things are breaking down overall, the basic building blocks of the universe still have this kind of resistance to change.
Right. And then if we jump over to quantum mechanics, there's this really mind-blowing concept called wave function collapse. So basically, before we observe a quantum particle, it exists in all these possible states at once.
Like it's in multiple realities at the same time.
Yeah, kinda. And then when we observe it, all those possibilities collapse down into one definite state.
Whoa. Okay, so does that mean that things only really exist when we observe them? Or is there some kind of deeper persistence happening that we just can't see until we look at it? It's a big question, and it really challenges how we think about what it means for something to exist. And speaking of existence, we're living in an increasingly digital world, right? So, does this idea of ontological inertia apply to things that aren't even physical? Like, what about AI or all the data we're constantly creating and storing?
It makes you wonder, right? Like, if we create an AI, does it have its own kind of like digital ontological inertia?
Hmm.
Once it's running, does it just keep existing unless we specifically shut it down or delete it?
And all that data we store, it doesn't just disappear on its own, right? It takes effort to completely erase it. It's like there's this persistence built into the very structure of digital systems.
Yeah, like it's not just some fleeting thing that pops in and out of existence. Once it's there, it kind of wants to stick around.
And that's because of how we design these systems, right? With backups, redundancy, all that. It reinforces this idea inherent persistence in the digital world.
So this ontological inertia thing, it's not just some abstract philosophical idea, is it?
No, definitely not. It can show up in our everyday lives in all sorts of ways.
Like how?
Well, think about habits, right? Like, how hard is it to break a habit even when you really want to? Or think about your own sense of identity. We often just continue with these established patterns, not because we're constantly choosing them, but because they're already there.
So it's not just laziness or anything like that. It's like the momentum of existence itself is keeping us in these patterns.
Right. It's this kind of like existential inertia. It's this feeling of being stuck, not necessarily because we want to be, but because that's just the path we've been on. And it can be really hard to break free from that.
It's not just individuals, right? It seems like this applies to bigger things too, like the social structures you mentioned.
Absolutely. Think about like institutions, political systems, even just social norms. They can be really resistant to change, even when they're not working anymore.
It's like they have a life of their own and they just
Mhm.
want to keep on going.
Exactly. So to sum it all up, this idea of ontological inertia, it's about more than just things continuing to exist. It makes us question why things end, how they change, and what forces are needed to make those changes happen.
Yeah, and it makes you look at the world a little differently. Like instead of just asking, why do things exist? We start asking, why do things stop existing? It flips the whole question on its head.
It does, and it makes you think about all the things in your own life that might be affected by this, right? Like your habits, your beliefs, your surroundings, your job, your relationships. Are they continuing just because of their own momentum, or are you actively choosing them? And what would it take to really change them? What forces would you need to bring to bear?
It's a lot to think about for sure. And I think it's something that each listener can take away and really consider in their own lives.
Oh.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. It's been really insightful.
Yeah, it's been fun. I always enjoy exploring these big questions with you.
Same here. All right, well, that's it for today. Until next time, keep on questioning, keep on exploring, and keep on being.
And maybe keep an eye out for those forces that might be pushing you to change, even if you don't realize it.
Good point. Take care, everyone.
See ya.